Goebbels level propaganda. But, trying to really spark a real armed uprising that would justify probably just about anything, martial law, what have you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I am fairly sympathetic to that view myself. It's, I very frequently see myself. I just saw somebody on the Twitter talking about that there needs to be a conservative march on Washington on 9/11. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, I saw that also. What are you thinking? The streets don't belong to us. It's not an option. You can't
there needs to be a relentless meme war on 9/11 or something, but do not show up. Do not.
And I think it was this morning. I've lost track of time myself, but when I woke up, it occurred to me as I was thinking through people that I have dealt with in the last few years, and asking myself, okay, so who's the Fed? I mean, even if only 1/10 of this right-wing fantasy is accurate, that 1/10 has been enough to cause people not to have the level of trust that they otherwise might. They probably just as well that they don't, but it makes it harder to organize.
It does.
And you have to, who's in your Telegram channel? Who's in your Clubhouse room?
This is why I don't have a New Discourses chat channel at all, because we tried one briefly at the very beginning and it was infiltrated not by a Fed, but just by a goober within days. Just one of these like lackeys that follows us around on social media and just to try to like piss on our cornflakes every time we say anything. So it's like, well, if that can happen, somebody who actually knows what they're doing is going to be far less obvious and whatever else. And so it does. It makes it very difficult to organize. It makes it very, I hate to use Harry Potter analogies because it's like a children's book and all of this, but it's very Order of the Phoenix level kind of stuff.
Hitler wrote Mein Kampf while he was in prison for insurrection. So the lesson evidently to be deduced from that is that if the very worst people are given a platform and allowed to be heard under a liberal notion, such as the one that Weimar employed while Hitler was in prison, all the things. And the problem, I think, with that analysis is that Mein Kampf isn't what gave Hitler emergency powers. And Mein Kampf isn't what got him appointed as chancellor. And Mein Kampf was a book that he made a lot of money off, but I don't think there was it wasn't, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, Mussolini made fun of Mein Kampf, actually. He said that it was terrible. It's true. But yeah, so I mean, that is the summary of what they seem to believe, is that if these ideas are allowed out into the world, if they're not contained, then fascism is going to take root. And, the history of the United States has not borne that out. Bad ideas come out. People, not only do they argue against them, which is what we always talk about. Oh, bad speech requires more speech. Arguments, argue against it. No, they get made fun of is what happens. They get laughed out of the room most of the time. And it's only when you create some kind of a nasty power vacuum where certain positions are not allowed to be spoken about that you have extremism being able to step into that gap. It's in fact the censorship that creates the vacuum that makes something like Mein Kampf and the arguments that followed from Hitler after Mein Kampf attractive to people. Because what's happening is you have some lunatic who's saying utterly lunatic things with little salt and pepper of truth that nobody else is allowed to say sprinkled in. And that thing nobody's allowed to talk about attracts people. They're like, this guy must be onto something.
And what's that thing? That thing for our era is racism.
Sure, how the communists had intended to use race from the 1920s and 30s to wedge America open. They knew it would work. They just didn't know how to get it done. Marcuse.
Well, I think there was no traction yet because racism was still not a problem. In other words, it wasn't a problem in polite society to be racist.
Correct. And so this is where it gets very interesting as we look at Marcuse. Again, I reference, we could talk about One Dimensional Man in 1964. We could talk about essay on liberation in 69, there he's tapping into some weird idea. And what he's recognizing is, oh, wow. And this is something that he and Max Horkheimer, another critical theorist, thought simultaneously through the 60s. They're like, wow. There's actually interviews, by the way, of Horkheimer saying this. The capitalist society is working. It doesn't immiserate people like Marx thought. It makes their lives better. And so what Marcuse says is that capitalism figured out how to stabilize the working class. The working class is happy. In other words, they're never going to become a proletariat. They're never going to rise up. And so he said that we need to find a new source for this revolutionary energy. And he identifies, in his own words, the ghetto population.
Now, hold on. So in other words, even though the problem we sought to solve by revolution, which was also supposed to be the path to revolution, doesn't exist anymore, we still want revolution. Why? Because we'll be in charge of the revolution.
Exactly.
Even though, so we need to just find a different path. But by acknowledging that the workers have been bought off by toasters and TV sets, what an awful, terrible thing.
And cool cars and babes.
And babes. They acknowledge that there isn't really a proletarian pressure for revolution, but the vanguard is looking for work.
Exactly.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah. So he writes explicitly there that the energy is located in the ghetto populations.